Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 221. What are the strategies for being a productive developer with ADHD? And how can you help your team members with ADHD succeed and complete projects? This week on the show, we speak with Chris Ferdinandi about his website and podcast, ADHD for the Win. Chris struggled with productivity early in his career as a developer. He shares systems and strategies he's developed to harness the focusing power of ADHD. We discuss time management, meetings, and maintaining productivity in a hectic world. Chris also shares resources for learning more about defining ADHD, self-evaluation, and how to keep getting things done. This episode is brought to you by InfluxData. InfluxDB is a purpose-built time series platform for ingesting, storing, and analyzing metrics, events, and logs with sub-second query responses and high interoperability. Start now at InfluxData.com. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show.
Christopher, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
I was talking to my friend Christopher Trudeau, and he mentioned that you were on Talk Python. So I kind of got a chance to listen to what you were talking about there. And I feel like it's something that will be of interest of my audience too, of being a developer, understanding sort of the challenges of ADHD. And also, I think it might help a lot of us who maybe scratch their head from time to time, especially in today's world. Are these things that are challenges for me too? And I think there might be a lot of help in here for them too.
Absolutely. I certainly hope so.
So I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah. So actually, I want to start with this first question. Why do you think coding might be the perfect career for someone with ADHD?
Yeah. So to answer that question, I need to take a step back
That's okay.
for just 1 second and explain what ADHD is for someone who may have heard of it a while ago or never heard the term, whatever. But so ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, but it's a really bad name for what it actually is. So ADHD is an executive functioning disorder, which means that folks who have it have trouble regulating their attention. It's not that we don't have enough of it. It's that sometimes it's pointed in a million different directions. Sometimes it's overly focused on just one thing. But from a biological perspective, people with ADHD, our brains do not make enough dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter responsible for memory, learning, focus, and a whole bunch of other things. So the reason I often say that I think web development is a perfect job for folks with ADHD is those tight feedback loops that you get from coding, where you have, first of all, you're often thrown like a weird challenge with kind of some fuzzy borders and you need to figure out how to make it work within the constraints you have. That's exciting.
Sure.
So that's like instantly kind of a hook. It's like a game. And then much like a video game, you get these really tight feedback loops where you write some code, you run a thing, it works or it doesn't. Hopefully, if it doesn't work, you get an error that you can start to pull at and like, right. Dig into the threads. But it's like, as far as careers go, it's the most like gamified career I have found. And every time you write some code and it works, or you write some and it doesn't, but you have another like thread you can pull at, it creates a little spike of dopamine in your brain. And for an ADHD person, it is a profession that can work really well with your ADHD, whereas other types of jobs sometimes work against it. So, I mentioned that we have trouble regulating our attention. While I think the kind of the perception of an ADHD person is like that very scattered, aloof, like chasing a butterfly through a field, squirrel kind of thing.
Right.
And that is absolutely the case sometimes. Other times, if you're really interested in something, you go into this, it's almost like a flow state where like you tune out everything around you and you're really into what you're doing. But for an ADHD person, it's like magnified or extremely intense. It's called hyperfocus. It often means you will forget to do really important things like eat, drink, go to the bathroom,
Right.
attend important meetings, whatever. But if you have a task, like a coding task, and you get those feedback loops and you start to get really into it, you can very easily move into hyperfocus on that task and end up being more productive than a similarly skilled peer doing the same thing. So when the conditions are right, there's a lot of caveats here, but when the conditions are right, it can be a job that you just absolutely crush it at.
Yeah.
There are a whole bunch of situations in the working world that actually work against you getting there. And we can talk about that. But when the stars line up, you can be orders of magnitude more productive than a neurotypical person might be doing the same task.
The thing that you're mentioning there of focus, I think of it as like a light of sorts.
Yep.
How, like, I've done a little bit with video. And so, like, having a light that's just a bare bulb and how it lights up a room and it's just like spread light everywhere, as opposed to like having barn doors or having some kind of tool to like focus it and control it and like direct it. And I feel like that's like a constant battle.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic analogy. I'm actually mad I didn't think of it. It is absolutely like, it's like sometimes you have an open light bulb spraying light everywhere. And sometimes you have one of those like cones on it that focuses it in a very specific direction. Absolutely.
Yeah, they have these things called like snoots and other stuff that like totally like completely pinpoints and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's usually one or the other, though. It's not like, I know there's a lot of different, you can spread it in like a 180 degree. It's never like that for us. It's everywhere or straight ahead.
Yeah. That's interesting. Is that something that you can feel happening to you, or is just something that is just unconscious? It just is happening all the time?
Which part?
The focus like shifting, and losing focus.
Yeah, so you can definitely feel it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just kind of an omnipresent thing.
Okay.
You can definitely tell when you're going into hyperfocus. One of the hallmarks is that if someone interrupts you or something, you tend to get really mad about it because it's so difficult to get into it. So, I guess actually that's a good point. There are almost certainly situations where you don't realize you're getting into it until you get pulled out of it. And that's probably, like, I know when I'm not in it because I'm a mess and getting things, like doing any type of work becomes really challenging. But when I'm in hyperfocus mode, it is just all cylinders.
Yeah. You mentioned the challenges of kind of going through your day of working definitely in a company and the idea of having meetings.
Yep.
And that there must be like 3 or 4 of your daily tips that are just about this topic.
Yeah.
And I can kind of see how it sticks in your craw. And I have a similar problem. I know my boss may be listening to this. But meetings just destroy my day also. And I have a kind of a slightly unique problem is that we are global.
Yep.
So a lot of the people that we're meeting with, we try to figure out a schedule. Okay, this will be at the end of their day over in Europe, and then it'll be over here, your mid-morning or whatever. And it really can mess with the person. Like I don't believe I have ADHD, but I definitely have factors in my life that I've scoped out about myself. One of them is, hey, I'm a morning person. I'm going to get a lot done in the morning. I'm going to have as much focus as I'm ever going to have within the day. I think you mentioned this.
Yeah.
If we can leave that stuff to the evening, when my batteries are kind of a little lower and I'm like maybe not going to be able to dive into hyper-focus mode, maybe a meeting will work then. And I kind of feel the same way. Like I feel like if I can get in the zone and so forth, but you throw a meeting like, if my day starts at 8 a.m., you throw a meeting at 10 and then another one at 12 or something like that. It's like gone.
Yeah. And this is true for, I don't even want to say all developers. I feel like most people, but dev work in particular is one where getting into a flow state is an important part of being productive, right? Especially if you're not just doing like, no shade on like, CSS or front-end development, but like, if you're updating some classes on an element or like moving some things around, like that's relatively like you can jump in and out of that often relatively easily. But if you're like writing some sort of more intense program or app or script, or even just building out like a complex UI.
Yeah.
Being able to deeply focus on that is really important. And meetings absolutely wreck flow state. Where the problem gets exacerbated for folks with ADHD is where a neurotypical person can break flow state, and then even if they don't get like into a deep flow, can start to kind of pick at the edges of that work once the interruption is gone. As an ADHD person, it might take me 30 minutes to an hour to even like start actually doing the work again.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have like a big rock, and once you get it moving, that rock is not going to stop. It's just going to plow down the hill and take out everything. But getting it rolling in the first place is really, really difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so interruptions are particularly bad. It's even worse when I think I wrote about, it's called the temporal dead zone.
Yeah.
Where you finish a task and then you have a meeting coming up in, let's say, 30 minutes, an hour. As an ADHD person, this is a thing I've talked to a lot of ADHD folks, and it's usually not a thing you consciously do, but it seems to be a thing that like a lot of us do, which is you will not start anything new because you know that one of two things will happen. You'll either just start to get into it, and then the meeting will come up and you'll have like wasted all that time anyways, or you'll hit a hyper-focused state and then have to break it or miss your meeting entirely. That has happened to me more times than I can count. My Apple Watch is the only thing that stops that from happening now. And yeah, either one is a bad outcome, especially in a work environment. So yeah, just meetings, midday meetings are the absolute worst. They are the bane of my existence.
I thought maybe we could kind of sprinkle tips as we go.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable with that. Like,
yeah,
are there tasks that you think, obviously the hyper-focus state is a dangerous thing to enter in between two meetings.
Yes.
What would be tips that you have?
Yeah.
What should you try to tackle in there? I know for me, like I might tackle the email. I know my generation is a little removed. I am comfortable with phone calls. I get a lot done in them. I can figure out the tone of what somebody's saying, and I can get to the point pretty quickly. Yeah. And I can tell by somebody that they're busy and I can get out of their way, but it's going to be way faster than me obsessing about how to write this perfect email and come across as a professional and so forth. And I know that's a generational divide because like, whatever, but writing an email is way more work.
Because I don't care about looking professional in my emails at all.
See, I guess that's the thing, right? Yeah. I punctuate my texts,
Like, to be fair, I get annoyed when people don't use punctuation in text. Like I'm elder millennial, so like I still use punctuation and I bleed into Gen X a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, email is a really good one to try and fill that gap.
Sure.
The reality is that if your day is filled with kind of those sorts of tasks in the middle, you could spend a whole day at work and not actually get anything done. And so my best kind of strategy or recommendation for people with ADHD in a work environment is to literally block out your time. Like and this is a tip I learned from a neurotypical manager. They were one of those people that had like 3,000 unread emails in their inbox, and they were double booked in meetings all the time. They just started throwing like 2 to 4 hour chunks on their calendar that just said like work or busy, so that people would book over them anyways. But because people in certain businesses are terrible, but
exactly, there are bad humans out there.
but it allowed them to have much more chunks of open time, and so I started doing that. And it works really well because what ends up happening is you'll get, occasionally if someone really needs you, you'll get an email that says, hey, like, I really, I was hoping to get some time with you on topic. I don't see any open time during my working hours. Do you have something that might work? And now you can be like, oh yeah, I can free up some time here, there. Or what often happens is that person is usually in your generation, Chris, and it turns out you could just square it up with an email and you don't need to have the meeting. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But sometimes that actually is the case where like they just have a quick question and you can fire off a response. But it gives you the flexibility to accommodate when there's a legitimate need without having, because I feel like in a lot of times in companies, there's this this culture where if the spot is open on your calendar, it's someone else's for the taking. And that, I think that's bad for anybody, but it creates some really bad problems for neurodivergent folks of all stripes, not just ADHD. And I think it is completely reasonable and appropriate and important even to just reclaim that time as your own. So I try to stagger them. I guess that's the other tip here, right? So I won't just have like 10 to 2 every day blocked out, although that is my optimum working time. But I might have a little bit earlier one day, a little bit more in the afternoon another day. That way, if I have folks who legitimately, like, especially where you have international colleagues, right, that can only meet later in the day or at night or whatever, like it gives them spots that might work for them. So it doesn't always have to be the same time every day. But just having these big chunks where this is my time and I'm not going to get interrupted.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other like small things that can be tackled in a certain amount of time. I know that you are a fan of just getting things written down. Is it time to do something like that to prune your list? You talked about defragging is a thing that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, the writing stuff down needs to happen like literally as things come to you. So the ADHD brain has, and this is a dopamine thing again, it's so annoying. We have really large hard drives. So like I will remember I remember my friend Sergio ripping Chuck E. Cheese's tail off at Dominique's 3rd birthday at Chuck E. Cheese, like back in the day, right? And I remember like what he had on when I had all this like ridiculous detail.
Right.
But I misplace my keys every day, right? Or like I'll have an idea and then 2 seconds later it's gone. Like we have really bad working memory. In computer terms, like an ADHD brain has almost no RAM. And so if you can hold 2 things in your head, great. A third one's going to bump one of those 2 things out. So if you have an idea, someone asks you something, you think of something you need to do, you need to write it down right away, or you will lose it forever because it never gets written into long-term storage. So the writing things down piece, that needs to happen in the moment. That's not like a scheduled task. But what you will find happen is that over time, your notebook will get really cluttered. And much like, I don't think you really have to do this anymore. I feel like computers kind of do this automatically now. But those of you who grew up on like Windows 3, right, will remember that over time, like your computer profile, if you looked at it, would have like all these random dots of memory occupations spread out in random places, and you'd run a defrag and it would clean it all up. And it's helpful to do that with your notebook, your to-do list, your capturing device every now and then because it gets messy.
Yeah.
I don't do it all that often. I actually think doing it too often can create for those of you who have read Getting Things Done by David Allen, you get into this habit with systems like that where you obsess over the system to the detriment of the work.
Yes.
And over obsessing over cleaning out your notebook can lead to a similar effect where that becomes the thing you do instead of the stuff that's actually on the to-do list.
Right.
Yeah. So I try not to do that too often. In reality, what actually ends up happening is you go down like a YouTube or TikTok rabbit hole for a half hour until the meeting starts and you don't actually do any work.
Right. Yeah.
As much as I'd like to say you fill that time with productivity. Because even like, let's say you did look at the notebook, there's a high likelihood you'll be like, oh, this thing, oh, then I got to go. And it spikes your anxiety level. It creates a whole bunch of stress because it's all stuff that like you can't do now anyways, that then starts to occupy your limited working memory. So yeah, and most ADHD folks I know tend to fill downtime with, I don't want to say nonsense activities, but certainly not work, which is another reason why midday meetings are so damaging.
Developers love InfluxDB because it excels in real-time performance for time series data, offering sub-second query responses and scalable architecture. It separates storage and compute using cost-effective Apache Parquet files to slash storage costs significantly. Its open architecture allows direct access to data for analytics, business intelligence, and machine learning, eliminating complex ETL needs. Learn more at InfluxData.com. That's InfluxData.com. Yeah, I think about a couple things there. One is downtime isn't bad. And
yeah, for sure.
The idea of recharging your brain and taking a moment is so incredible as far as being a programmer, because like you mentioned, like having the ability to do this sort of capture, wherever you are, be it in the shower or whatever, but just going on a walk, like you solve things. Your brain is in like a different state, different mode. You've left the desk. And I find that stuff really fascinating. And are those types of things that do help an ADHD person?
That's a really good point. So there are times I don't do it as much as I should, but there are absolutely times where I've got those downtimes. Like that for me is, oh God, I haven't eaten in 4 hours. I need to go have a snack. I need to have a drink. Let me go walk the dog. Right. And so, like cup of coffee or like seltzer in hand, dog on leash. Exercise creates dopamine, which my brain needs more of.
Yeah.
Sunshine creates dopamine, which my brain needs more of. I'm not sure if petting cute dogs makes more dopamine, but it's enjoyable. So
It definitely does. It definitely does.
But you're absolutely right. Like going on a walk, it's weird because like that's normally the time where my brain will start to bounce around. Like I'll cycle through like a lot of different things. But if I have a thorny computer problem I can't work through, sometimes I'll solve it on a walk. So yeah, I think getting away from a screen. This brings up another and I'm sorry, I can feel the ADHD scatter starting to kick in right now. But
it's okay. I mean, you were kind of digging into the idea of like solving that problem when you're on a walk.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out like, okay, well,
oh yeah.
That was the thing I had when I was in an office. Like I felt claustrophobic sometimes in an office for kind of different reasons. You talked about like, people interrupting you and so forth. Having a cubicle is nice, but there's still all these other people around that can come by and, interrupt you and so forth. So
the drive by, the pop in at the desk.
Yeah. And I had a friend, he's still a good friend, but he was totally that guy from Office Space. Like, hey,
Milton or the boss?
And like,
the boss, right?
The boss. Yeah, totally. Like, so about this weekend, kind of stuff. And I'm like, no. And he would just break my flow all the time. He just wanted to chat. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? Like, this is like him, I guess, maybe exercising something for himself, but it was always just like completely disruptive. And then trying to find a way to kind of get back on track from that. But I guess that's sort of like a meeting type of thing too. But like finding that environment to be in, to be able to think, I guess that's a big factor too.
This is why I went fully remote. I went partially remote 15 years ago and then fully remote a decade ago. And then I ended up taking a job that was in office with the potential to move partially remote after I got settled in.
Yeah.
And it ended up being one of these situations where every time I said, I feel settled in, oh, not yet, not yet. And then they were like, oh, we don't really do remote work here. And I was like, well, that's not what you told me. But it was an extremely open environment. So it wasn't even cubicles. It was like standing desks, no walls. And
wow,
I had like a Sonos right next to my desk that anybody in the office could control. And people walking by, like it was
like a jukebox kind of nonsense.
Basically, it was the worst possible environment for me that I could imagine. And so one of the things I write about, so just as a quick aside, anybody listening to this, if you go to adhdforthewin.com/realpython, I have links to a ton of articles that dig into some of the stuff Christopher and I are talking about. But one of those things is accommodations you can give yourself. So if you're in an office environment where you've talked to your manager and they're being kind of a jerk about it, or you don't feel like telling people you have ADHD yet or at all for whatever reason, there's a whole bunch of things you can do for yourself. And one of those is you got to be comfortable with the like ask forgiveness, not permission kind of model, which I very much am.
Okay.
I just started commandeering a like pop-in meeting space as my working space for like hours. I would go, there was this little like room on a balcony. I'd go sit out there and I would just code for like 2 or 3 hours. And people would be like, where the hell were you? I was trying to find you. And I'm like, we have Slack. You can message me anytime you want. I'll probably ignore you because I'm working.
All right.
Right? Like send an email. But that was really productive for me. If you're in a similar situation, another thing you can do is you might still occasionally get pop-ins, but like if your building has like a cafeteria or like a cafe coffee area, like when I used to work at EMC, before they were purchased by Dell, they had this little like coffee shop space that was super, super cute out in this like open lobby. And every now and then I'd see people I knew, but for the most part, it was just really nice white noise in the background. Like it was noisy, but the din of the people created this backdrop that was non-disruptive. And I would get so much more done than in a cubicle.
Yeah.
So little things like that can make a really big difference if you feel comfortable pulling it off, and if you don't get too much grief about it from your coworkers or manager, because that will sometimes happen depending on where you work, where people are really big on being seen and being able to interrupt you whenever they want. If you work in one of those places, leave, I guess, would be my recommendation.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I wonder about that. Like, I've mentioned a few times that this is one of the first jobs where I started out, entirely remote, and it was kind of an advantage. I was looking for that because I was going to be moving. And so the idea that, it didn't matter if I was, going to be in this state or this state or wherever I was.
Yep.
And at the time it was mostly part-time. So one of the things I was realizing with that of, okay, now I'm in my house, potentially the center of all distractions.
Yep.
I partly put a lot of distractions behind myself because I'm trying to remind myself to play guitar from time to time. Again,
having it out makes a huge difference, though, doesn't it? Because
exactly.
You see it, you grab it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But along with that, there's the laundry, there's the dishes, there's the dog, there's, all these different things. And I can imagine with that potential bare bulb moments of just being dragged into those things and not having the focus. Is that something that you experienced when you did get a chance to shift to work from home?
So initially, no, because it was just me in an empty house. I had the dog. So
sure.
I always we had a Bichon who's a lap dog, and then we had like an older lab, and like they just like sit by your feet, so they're very non-disruptive. They don't demand too much attention. But
don't get a border collie. That's what I have.
Right? Yeah, like a border collie or an Aussie or something like that. German Shepherd.
She pounds on my door to we need to play now. I'm like, stop.
Right? Yeah. No, if you get a working dog, different story. But if you have a lap dog, you're good. When 2020 happened and everything shifted home, my house got a lot noisier and a lot more distracting.
Yeah.
So we restructured some of the working spaces in the house so that my office is away from a majority of the noise. That has helped.
Okay.
I will confess, though, the biggest distraction in my house is the thing that I do all my work on, because my computer is a gaming machine, a TV, like a way for me to chat with friends who live around the globe. Like, it's just the worst possible distraction in my house is the thing I have to use for work every day.
Right.
The rest of the house is not nearly as much a distraction to me as my own computer is. And depending on your interests, that could be very different, right? Like if I had a wall of guitars behind me, I might be having a different conversation. If you see the video clip, you'll notice that the room is extremely Spartan.
Yeah.
That's kind of on purpose. It's a little, I should put up some pictures or something, but I don't have a lot of knickknacks because they would become things that would distract me.
Okay.
And so it's setting up your environment in a way that works for you is a big part of this too.
Yeah, switching to working at home. One of the things that's kind of related to that I find fascinating, like, again, talking about sort of the generational thing. I was definitely raised by TV. My parents had the TV on almost 24/7, I swear, and it was just like how they lived their lives. And I have a horrible habit. If you take me out to like a sports bar, you have to face me away from those televisions and those kinds of things because I just get sucked in. You talk about the idea of like, it's not focus, your brain's bored. And I feel like maybe that is kind of a bit of an ADHD trait. And there are people like my wife who can have a literal Twitch stream running beside her while she's working, or a TV show or a movie or whatever. And it drives me crazy. Like, I don't know if, you have that sort of experience as an ADHD person. So.
So my wife, even college, she would study with like TV on. She working, she'd work with TV on.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how she does it. The one exception for me, so like I talked a little bit about like the cafe white noise experience.
Yeah.
My number one, like when I really want to like kick on hyperfocus when I'm coding, I will throw on like Bob Ross's The Joy of Painting on YouTube in the background and let it just autoplay from episode to episode. And I've seen every episode. He's got like a dozen so seasons. I've seen every single one. So it's not like a surprise. Right? I'm not watching to learn what happens.
Yeah.
He painted a tree. Yep, it happened.
Right.
Just the gentleness of his voice and the ASMR of the like brush on canvas.
Interesting.
Creates like, it actually helps drown out other environmental noises for me. And that is the one exception to that rule. Because, otherwise...
Yeah, it's kind of like a painting class is happening next to you and you're working.
Now, the flip side is if I'm not working, I am also the type of person who will be watching TV while playing Magic the Gathering on my phone while I also have like my laptop open and I'm having a conversation with like a friend on Discord or something, right? So...
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm just bouncing back and forth between the three. And then, wait, what just happened there? Drives my wife nuts. Like, she's like, if you care about the TV show, watch it. If not, it's on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So like in work mode, I can't. But if it's just like casual mode, and this is not uncommon. Not everybody with ADHD is like this because everybody's ADHD experience is unique. But if you're not in a hyper-focus mode, that like multi-stimulus kind of thing where you've got a lot of different inputs and you want them all is also very common. Especially because this is going to sound so stupid, right? But like you're watching a TV show. Every TV show has like lulls and stuff.
Right.
And like where a neurotypical person might be like, okay, cool. This is a transition into another part of the story. I'm like, this is so boring, but I want to know what happens. So, pull out the phone, start playing a game while the show is on. It's, one of the other problems with meetings when you're in them is it's a very similar thing where you get these natural, like, this is a thing I can add value to, I'm interested in. This thing, it involves other people, it doesn't involve me. I'm bored. Neurotypical folks, I don't think always like understand how much boredom like physically hurts someone with ADHD. And like, I know it's like, it literally, like it's physically painful in a way that if you haven't experienced it, I can't really like accurately describe.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's more than just like, oh, I'm bored. It's like, it's actually painful. So like, you'll often see ADHD folks in meetings, like fidgeting on their phones, like scribbling or doodling, like fidgeting. I used to like pen caps, chew them all the time. And it's not that we're not paying attention. It's that we're trying desperately to keep paying attention. And if we stop doing these things, I'll get lost up here and,
right. There's some kind
not
of
hear anything that's going on.
Neuroreceptors that you're firing that is at least keeping that like boredom like satiated for the moment so I can continue my focus at you.
This is common with folks with autism or ASD as well. It's often referred to as stimming or self-stimulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a way to get a little bit of neurotransmitter activity going so that you don't just completely go off and think about something else and ignore people.
Right. And one of the questions that's on that self-assessment that I looked at as one of the resources is something I haven't experienced, which it kind of leads to the hyperactivity thing is like, can you sit in a meeting still, like to the end of the meeting? And that's not a problem I've ever had per se, but I definitely like, I totally get uncomfortable in chairs. I have, my wife and I joke about it. It's a male pattern ass loss. And it's just, I can't sit on like a wooden chair, like in a coffee shop. People always suggest like, oh, go to a coffee shop to work and so forth. And it's like, I can't sit in that chair. I can't. I'm sorry, unless I like take something with me, you know? And so like, I got to go somewhere where it's going to be comfortable or whatever. And these kind of environments, like, and so like the idea of like just being comfortable enough to like make it through the whole meeting, that's sort of fascinating to me that
some people can do that.
Is that a problem for you? That like, so just staying still through it?
One other thing you kind of bring up, we didn't talk about. So within ADHD, if you've been around a while, you may recall, or you may have even heard some people still use it, but like ADHD versus ADD, right? And so the H is for hyper. And
Yeah.
they used to be kind of two different things, but now it's all ADHD. In the medical community, it's all called ADHD with either the inattentive version, the hyperactive version, or both. Most people who are diagnosed have both. A lot of women are more likely to have the inattentive version, which doesn't have the hyperactivity, but does have the focus challenges.
Right.
For a long time, I had heard that it's more common in women, but what I'm learning is a lot of men who are diagnosed as adults have the inattentive subtype without the hyperactivity and seem to just get missed because they don't have that, like, I'm bouncing off the walls kind of thing. But
Right.
as you can probably tell,
easy for somebody to sort of spot, right?
I was that person. Like, there was no doubt. You can probably tell just from how fast I'm talking and how, like, manic I am right now. But
right.
Like, I remember my 5th grade teacher being like, "Oh God, yeah, no, you obviously have ADHD." Both of my twins do too. It's not, it's not a bad thing. I just, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
That was one of the hardest things about going from, like, college, where if you're not feeling it the day, maybe you just don't go, to, like, the working world where you're forced to be in rooms sitting still for long periods of time. And I remember the first time I actually had a boss who was ASD. He was on the spectrum, and he would get up and just pace around the room during meetings. And like, it had never occurred to me that you could do that. And it was the most freeing thing ever to not have to be like, oh, I don't have to sit here. I can, like, stand up. I could go, like, lean on the wall. I could, like, walk back and forth a little bit. I'm sure it was distracting as hell to other people.
I think about, like, a stand-up desk being useful in something like that.
So now that I'm remote, for me, it's my wireless headphones, and I often go camera off and pace when I talk to people because it gives my body something to do.
Right.
I guess I never really thought about this until you asked the question, but that has been another huge boon of remote work. And I can remember even having, like, a VP who was really insistent on, like, he wanted cameras on during meetings all the time. And I remember the day I decided to just not listen to him and not turn it on, and nothing ever happened to me. I didn't get punished for it, but, like, I'm not at my desk anyways. I'm all around the room. You're not going to see me. You're going to be staring at this blank taupe wall behind me.
Right. And it would be distracting with the camera on to other people who are trying to
But in office situations, like, sitting still in meetings is really tough for me. And I have some friends who are inattentive subtype, and that piece isn't as tough for them. It's more like the listening to the words and staying engaged in the content, but, like, the sitting still is not the problem. Whereas I am, like, the phrase they often use in the evaluations is acts as if driven by a motor. And that is very much me. Yeah.
This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. Building a graphical user interface, or GUI, for your Python applications is a common goal for many developers, and having a step-by-step project showing you how to lay out elements and structure your code to work within a GUI framework is a great first step. And that's what this course is. It's titled Build a GUI Calculator with PyQt and Python. It's based on a tutorial by Leodanis Pozo Ramos, and in the video course, Darren Jones takes you through how to create graphical user interfaces with Python and PyQt, how to connect user events through the app's GUI using the app's logic, how to organize a PyQt app using a proper project layout, and how to create a fully functional GUI application within the framework of PyQt. I think it's a worthy investment of your time to learn how to work with a GUI framework and how to structure your code to interact with widgets and how to effectively design your layout. Real Python video courses are broken into easily consumable sections, and where needed, include code examples for the techniques shown. All lessons have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the search tool on realpython.com. I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the self-assessment thing, but also kind of all these tangential things. Like, I have a problem right now myself. I know I do. That I have always clocked it to this perfectionism thing that I really, really want things to be just right, just so before I release them. It's partly me as a musician, when I get into photography, all these kind of creative pursuits I have.
Yep.
I don't want to share anything with anybody until it's like the polished gem, whatever. And that doesn't always work in a work environment. That's, me saying, this is my work, how I want to represent myself.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's necessarily, an intersection with ADHD. But you did have a sort of a daily tip.
Yeah.
That
so it sometimes is.
It just like raised my hair. Like I was like, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. And I'm like,
So this happens a lot with ADHD folks. Perfectionism is not just an ADHD thing, obviously, but
sure,
a lot of ADHD folks, especially ones who either live in an unsupporting household or grow up not knowing they have it and then learn as an adult, grow up getting told things like you're not living up to your potential, if only you tried harder, like just a lot of internalized like trauma and so on. And so amongst those folks, perfectionism tends to be a lot higher because they've been either overcompensating or masking their ADHD behaviors for so long because they didn't know, or they've been told that they're not doing it right. I had a little bit of that. I knew I had it when I was young, and my mom is very much of the like. So I am that classic millennial, like everybody gets a participation trophy. You're great the way I know, like this is like a big joke or whatever, but like I grew up just being told like you're awesome the way you are, and so I've never felt that like, oh, I'm not right. Something's wrong with me. I mean, there was definitely times where I'm like, this is harder than it should be. This sucks, right?
Yeah.
But I don't have a lot of that. So for me, perfectionism was less of an issue until I got to the working world and like just straight up for real. This is the opening paragraph to this new course I have on getting things done with ADHD. But like 3 weeks into my first real full-time, I'm like a serious professional job, I literally thought I was going to get fired because my boss kept throwing lots of work at me. None of it was too difficult, but just all these small things that I couldn't keep track of them all. I'd get told to do 5 things. I'd do 3 and forget the other 2 had even been asked of me, right? And that was actually how I got into, we talked a little bit before about like Merlin Mann and getting things done and stuff, but that's what introduced me to all of that because I Googled like how to get things done and it just opened up this whole new world for me. But that was around when I started to feel like, oh God, I'm maybe not as awesome as my mom told me I was. And I need to really get my stuff together or I'm going to get fired. And so I started to get a little bit more like things need to be really polished and really good around then. And the thing that got me out of it, since you mentioned the whole musician thing, this is going to sound absolutely stupid, was literally Lil Wayne. I know this sounds absolutely, so the rapper Lil Wayne.
Yeah, absolutely.
He doesn't do this as much anymore, but there was a period of time from like, let's say 2001, 2002 to like 2012, where he was you could not escape this dude. He was in every T-Pain song. He was all over the radio. And he had this habit of, he would just record like 15 songs a day and he would release all of them. And I honestly, 90% of them were garbage. But every now and then there would be a gem in there.
Right.
And there was something in that I was like, I remember hearing him talk about how like he just never knows when he goes in, like what's going to be good or not. And he just grinds at it until something good comes out. And you can burn yourself out doing this too, obviously. But early in my career, I kind of developed this mindset of like, oh, if you just throw enough spaghetti at the wall, eventually something will stick. Now that has its own problems, right? That's not always like the right approach, but it got me really comfortable with the idea that like the way to get something good is to do a bunch of bad stuff first, right?
Yeah.
And I know that sounds really, really silly, but like Lil Wayne, if you're listening, you had an incredible influence on my career. Thank you very much. But cool. Like in all seriousness, yeah, it's this whole mindset of anything worth doing is worth doing badly, right? So like if you're and this is very common, like ADHD folks will like forget to brush their teeth, or like I find brushing my teeth boring. So like 2 minutes of brushing, listen, a minute of brushing is better than 2 minutes of a minute of brushing is better than no minutes of brushing. Not as good as 2, better than none, right? Once a day is better than none. So yeah, there's just kind of this whole thing where like it's better to do something badly and just get it done than not do it at all. And that is why I now just like I get emails every week like, dude, there's a typo in your article today. There's a typo. I don't care. I wrote the article, right? It's free, right? You got what you paid for. It's free. It got done. That's better than me not having read it at all. Because the alternative is I proofread it a dozen times, make sure all the typos are gone, send it to someone else to proofread, run it through. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write it. I'm going to hit send. It's probably got errors. I probably use the wrong word half the time, but you knew what I meant enough to write me about it. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And in a working world, what ends up happening is you push it out the door, you get some feedback, and you fix it. Because I've been on the other side where I have spent way too long perfecting something only to find out that the thing I built went in a direction that's no longer relevant, or I misunderstood the instruction and went in the wrong direction, or we put it in front of users and it doesn't work the way we'd expected. And now rather than finding that out earlier, we spend a lot more time and money getting there, and we have to scrap the whole thing versus pivoting earlier in the process.
Yeah, it's the premise of a lot of these strategies beyond the waterfall technique that unfortunately get co-opted in weird ways. But I agree that shorter cycles of sort of, not daily, but at least checking in and seeing where things are at, it makes sense, and building the project as you go.
It also helps with, like one of the other things I hear from my ADHD brethren a lot, and I'm guilty of myself, is like the first 80 to 90% is really easy, even though it's often the hardest work in a project. Like getting things stood up is easy for an ADHD person because it's new and it's exciting.
Yeah.
So you can really dig into it. And then you get to that end where there's a lot of like, change this one little thing, change that one little thing. Oh, we need to tweak this a little bit. We need to do that. That part gets really boring. And like, I could do the first 90% of a project in 2 days and then take 2 weeks to do that last 10% because it's so boring. And I have found that hurling things over the fence faster kind of helps me get around that, right? So like, I do that first 90%, I hurl it over the fence, and now I don't want to say it's someone else's problem, but I have done the part of the project that I do best, and it gives someone else an opportunity to find those little details that I might miss or that I like hate or suck at. And like, there are people who absolutely thrive on that. Like, I think about QA engineers who really love digging into like the minutia of, right? Like,
sure.
Yeah. I feel like I had a point and I maybe lost it, Christopher, but I feel like somewhere in there's a nugget of...
No, that's okay. I get it. Like
a nugget of goodness.
We talked about this recently. We were discussing kind of a similar idea here that it is fun to stand things up, to solve the problem, to figure things out. But there is a lot of hard work, and the basic title of the article was Prototypes Suck. And what they meant by that is that people see that prototype and say, oh, it's done. You don't have any more work to do. It works. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, this is just a proof of concept. And his goal was like, hey, take that thing away from them, shred it, then build it based upon, using the types of techniques that make it be sustainable, to be part of the team and use the architecture that is actually usable. And that's can be a painful process, but also it's that balancing act between the prototyping and the finished product that is hard. And I can imagine I have the same problem. My problem is the starting very often. It's just get it started. And so I've thought about doing for a variety of creative things, but also programming things, just like, I got to get past it, I got to get past I don't know if I want to make it public, like one of these things that the Lil Wayne way or not. But I think that might be an answer. Like there's a lot of these musician people that do like a song a week or things like that are kind of fascinating to me. But yeah, I wonder, on top of that, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on the prototype to finished product thing.
Other than just it's hard. Like that
yeah.
It's the fit and finish, not even the prototype to not prototype, but it's when you get into that phase of a project where it's like, we need to move this. I'm going to use front end examples because that's where a majority of my kind of working life is, right? But like, we need to move the nav, like the nav hamburger button to the other side of the screen. And we need to change this color from like 0088cc to 0088ff or like what, like all those like kind of little, like those are much more transactional than I'm solving interesting problems. And that's where it starts to get really, really tough, whereas like we need to design this UI. That's exciting. We need to like make these tiny little adjustments to the UI. That's super boring. And I know for a lot of folks, that's like a majority of their job. I think those jobs are often bad fits for folks with ADHD specifically. There are other types of neurodivergence that I think they work well for.
Are there any techniques you can think of that help with that? Or is it just like that can make it unboring?
Any of the techniques I have seen usually circle around like tricking your brain, like make it fun, make it a game, see how many you can do. And in my experience, and from talking to other folks as well, some folks that actually works for, but for a majority of us, that either doesn't work at all because your brain knows it's BS, or it works for like a little while and then it stops because like, oh, now the game's boring, right?
Yeah.
One of the other things that comes up a lot, right, is like deadlines work really well for ADHD folks because now it creates this sense of urgency that spikes your adrenaline, that creates dopamine. So people are like, oh, give yourself a deadline. And then when that comes up, the same thing will happen. And it's like, but no, because when that deadline shows up on my calendar, my brain goes, hey, you made that up. You don't need this thing for another week, right?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, we talked about it briefly before we began, the idea of like a pomodoro timer, which I know works for a lot of people. This idea of okay, I'm going to... I thought of it when I was talking to my wife about it this morning. Like, it's sort of like adult recess.
Yeah.
Like, like as a child, like I have to be in class for 50 minutes and then I got a 10-minute recess and then we can go to the next class and so forth. And I feel like that's kind of the idea behind Pomodoro timers in some ways, some of the working there. But you were saying that didn't work so well for you.
Yeah. So for two reasons. One, because I know it's not a real time. It's like I set this timer. It's not like a real thing. The other problem is 20 minutes is not enough time for me to really get into any sort of meaningful work. And so when the timer goes off, I'm just annoyed. I know for a lot of folks, the thinking is, I only have to do this thing for 20 minutes. So even though I hate it, it can be done. But for me, it's just, it all feels very artificial. If it's something that I really want to be doing, that doesn't work for me either. So what I typically do, like if I have a big project, I will take a notebook. If it's a UI based project, I'll literally draw the UI. If it's you can't see it in the UI kind of thing, I'll write out like what it's supposed to do. And then I kind of start to map it to specific bits of code or like different steps. Like, okay, we got to build this API piece first so that it can talk to this other API that can do that thing. I don't always necessarily start at the beginning, though. I look at that list and I say, which one of these is either the shortest one to accomplish or the one I'm most interested in? If there's one I'm interested in, I do that first. If not, I just pick the smallest one. But the idea for someone like me is you want to start moving in the direction of work. Even if it's like the least important kind of piece of this task, you just want to start getting some work-like momentum. Because once you get rolling a little bit, you can do something a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And eventually you get into the swing of it and you don't even have to think about it. You're just moving. But getting going is the hard part.
Then you're in the zone, if you will, again.
Yeah, hopefully, ideally. Unless someone interrupts you with a pop-in or a meeting or something. Then you start all over.
We're back there.
But this is why those like pop-ins and meetings are so awful. Like I turn off, like when I'm really working, I turn off Slack and Discord. Like I don't want to hear from anybody.
Yeah, I'm getting more annoyed by those things by the day.
I believe it.
I get involved in these text chains sometimes, like even if it's like a family thing.
Yeah.
And just the ringing, dinging, whatever kind of stuff. It's just like, I just stop, like, and it's kind of interesting. And I wondered about that, like, not to be old man yells at cloud kind of thing, but like, does this change, has it evolved for you as you've aged?
Yeah. So I have over my life, so early on, I was like, as a kid, the hyperactivity was through the roof. And that was true through my 20s. I developed a lot of techniques and strategies that kind of worked for me. But one of the other things that really helped was around the age of 30 when my metabolism started to slow down. And I am still, like, I was talking to my psychologist a couple weeks ago, and she's like, for a 40-something-year-old guy, you are still really hyperactive. But I am much slower than I used to be. And
Sure.
that has helped in a lot of ways. But the other thing I'm finding is my somewhere in the last like year or three, my the distractibility has started to get a little bit worse. And I don't know if it's I'm aging now. And so like my brain is just starting to do what old brains do and like start to slow down a little. Is it like lingering kind of symptoms from that COVID infection I had a year ago? Is it the fact that there's been a whole bunch of like cultural and social upheaval over the last 4 years? And so I just have a lot more going on up here than like I did, in my early to mid 30s. But
Right.
So yeah, I am just personally finding that my ADHD has gotten a little bit harder to manage, isn't the right word, but a lot of the strategies that historically worked for me don't work quite as well now as they did a decade ago, 5 years ago.
So you've had to, is that maybe part of this whole project then? Like the idea of like starting ADHD for the win, that you're like, I want to compartmentalize this thing better? Is that part of it?
So the ADHD for the Win project started for a few reasons. So I've written about my ADHD a few times on my other, like my front end education thing. And every time I do, I always get a bunch of emails from folks that are like, hey, this really resonates with me. Like, I got a diagnosis because you talked about it, or thank you for normalizing this. I always felt really like weird about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other piece of it is that I have seen my developer education business start to wane over the last few years as the marketplace has changed, as there's a lot more free content, as our industry's in kind of a weird place. And I've also heard from a lot of my students are ADHD themselves. I think it's like a like attracts like kind of thing.
Sure.
But I've had a lot of them tell me that they feel like they're struggling a lot more than they used to as well. And so I thought it might be interesting to just start talking about it more as its own thing. And I didn't want to completely transform my other site, Go Make Things, into just the ADHD site, because not everybody who reads that has ADHD. So I started this other kind of side project. And yeah, for me, it's been just kind of a fun exploration of my ADHD and a way for me to talk more about that without annoying people who don't want to hear it. And
Right.
Connect with more ADHD folks, because my other audience is very front end focused. And there's a lot of developers from other languages who like Python, who also, you mentioned earlier on that I was also on the Talk Python podcast, and I got so many emails from folks who were like, oh my God, like do I have ADHD? This feels a lot like me, right? So like that every time
Right.
I go on one of these, I have something like that happen. And it's really, really cool to help other folks learn more about themselves. I was just reading an article the other day. It was oriented around students, but around how when you teach ADHD kids that they have ADHD and what that actually means about how their brain works, not just like you have it and you suck at these things, but these things are challenging for you because of this aspect of your brain. They're able to come up with strategies that help them work around it. They're able to understand, I'm not dumb. My brain just works differently around this thing. And then they start to do much better in school than people with ADHD who aren't told that. And I'm hearing similar things from working people. Yeah, it's been kind of a very personally rewarding kind of project for me.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going well.
Ish. It's in its early phase, where I think we're on month like 3 right now. So it's still very early.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to become.
When you decided to do the podcast part of it,
Mm-hmm.
was keeping them as short bites like important to you?
Yeah, less for other people and more for me. In a conversation like this, so like when I interview people on this Go Make Things has a podcast too. Like when I interview folks, I can go for like an hour more. because you're chatting.
Yeah.
But when it's just me in front of a microphone, I will burn out after like 10 minutes. So yeah, keeping them short it's a for me thing. And as a side benefit, a lot of my ADHD folks are like, it's weird. In an interview, they will listen to this whole thing, no problem. But like if I'm just talking, short and sweet is better because it just enough information. It gives you some time to absorb it and internalize it.
Sure.
It also helps me produce more of them because I can knock them out,
Yeah. There's so much more I wanted to talk to you about, but we're kind of about an hour here.
Yeah.
It's really been fascinating talking to you, but do you feel like we hit a lot of the stuff that you wanted to touch on?
The interesting thing about this episode is, I mentioned my mental ability to manage my ADHD has gone down recently. I actually, despite having been diagnosed as a kid, I've never been medicated. And today is day one of Adderall for me. It's my first time trying. So
okay.
I can't tell if I was more focused than I would have been or more all over the map. But
okay.
But yeah, the medication piece, we didn't mention it. There's really not a whole ton to talk about other than the whole point of ADHD medication is to get your brain to either make more dopamine or retain more of the dopamine it actually makes.
Yeah.
With the idea being that when you address that, you would address a lot of the downstream effects of not having enough dopamine. Yeah, it will be an interesting experiment for me. There's no judgment if you are on medication, if you choose not to because it's not right for you.
Right.
I've had friends who say they literally can't get through their day without it. Friends who say they tried it and it made them feel weird and they didn't like it. Everybody's body responds differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only other footnote there is if you do want to look into medication, if you have ADHD and you're curious about it, you need an official diagnosis. You need like a prescriber to actually write it for you. And in America, it is absurdly difficult to get your hands on if you're not like a college student. My psychiatrist was telling me that on a college camp, because it's people sell it all the time on the black market, they're really weird about writing prescriptions and controlling how much you get, blah, blah, blah. So, so it was harder for me as an adult to get it than it probably would have been if I was just in college. I could probably just find it from anybody, anywhere. But as an adult, I had to jump through a million hoops to get my prescription.
Yeah. One of the things that you provide on your site is a lot of additional resources that we didn't really dig into, along with your daily tips and so forth. Do you want to just talk a little bit about all the different things you have on the site?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So if you head over to ADHD for the win /RealPython, with or without the dash, either one will get you there.
Okay.
I've got links to a whole bunch of stuff. I think the meat of what I do is every morning I send out a short article on being a dev with ADHD, either a problem or a thing that's helped me kind of work through my workday more effectively, or a little thing that says, hey, you're not broken. It's everybody else is the problem, like my Mr. Skinner moment, it's the kids who are wrong. So that's the meat of it. I also have a new course out. The non-swear version is getting stuff done with ADHD. I swear a lot, so you'll catch a lot of that on the site. Yeah, I also have a podcast that I update semi-periodically. A Discord community if you want to connect with, if you have ADHD or you think you do, and you want to chat with other ADHD folks about what that's like. That's free and open to anyone currently, so feel free to check that as well. I am exploring spinning up some career coaching for folks who want to actually work in a more intensive way through kind of their ADHD and the career challenges that result.
Cool. So I kind of modified my questions a little bit.
Yeah, please do. Or don't.
And the first one, no, it's okay. The first one was, what's something that helps keep you motivated to continue learning, programming specifically?
Yeah. So for me, it is both the only job I've ever actually been good at.
Okay.
And that kind of that ADHD, one of the most attractive things about it, also kind of the bane of my existence with programming, is there's always something new to learn. And so it's really hard to be bored.
Yeah.
Where my brain naturally gets bored with things once I've worked on them for a while, having something new to jump into, it just makes programming really, really exciting. And it's what keeps me going, learning new things.
That's cool. So what's something that you want to learn next? This doesn't have to be programming specific.
Yeah. So for me, I've been putting it off for a while, but I really want to get into woodworking. The more I work with computers, I started programming in large part because I like making things, but I'm bad at the trades and building things with my hands.
Yeah.
I want to get better at that.
Yeah. Takes time.
Part of it is like, I will measure 3 times and still cut a piece of wood wrong. And I want to get, I want to get better at that. And just as I start to get older and do more with my garden and stuff, I really want to be able to build things, right? I want to be able to make some raised beds or build an arbor to go in my garden, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably next for me. But that involves probably dropping money on some expensive like equipment that I don't know if I'm ready to make that investment yet. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. So we mentioned it already, kind of some of the best ways to follow your work online.
Yep.
Definitely head to ADHD FTW.
Yep. If you type in the full forthewin.com, that'll get you there too.
That works too?
I own both.
Okay.
I redirect.
Okay. Are you on the socials at all?
I am, yeah. Primarily Mastodon these days. Also Blue Sky, although not as much. I should probably drop a link. But you can find all that at ADHD for the Win. My email address, if you want to, like, if you're old like me and you still use email, I do read every single one and I respond to most of them. So, feel free to reach out and chat.
Awesome. Well, Chris, it's been fantastic to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. From one Christopher to another, it's been a pleasure.
And don't forget, for your time series needs, use InfluxDB. It's trusted by leading companies for its scalability, real-time performance, and easy integration with modern data stacks. Start for free at InfluxData.com. I want to thank Chris Ferdinandi for coming on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python Podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python Podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.